Hey everybody, let's go ahead and take a look here at our first literary movement, which is Romanticism, the Romantic period. One thing I always like to point out to students is that when we look at the dates here of 1785 to 1830, is that it's important to remember that these are dates that literary critics and historians have put on this period after the fact. In other words, when it was January 1st, 1785, people didn't wake up and say, oh, it's the Romantic period beginning. So that's something to keep in mind when we take a look at the Romantic period as well as the different movements that we'll take a look at in the class. So, a good way to understand Romanticism is to remember that the R in Romanticism stands for revolution. There's different revolutions going on during this time frame. One of those is the Industrial Revolution. So, of course, there's lots of different things that happen with the Industrial Revolution, but if you remember from history class, this is when the steam engine is improved and perfected to such a degree that it replaces water and wind as power source. So before, this is, people had windmills and those big mills on rivers that would turn, and that's how they would generate the ability to, say, for example, weave cloth or mill grain, right? So with the steam engine, the internal combustion engine being perfected during this time, there's the loss of home industries. So what that means is that before this time, it was very, very common for people to have a successful home business, say, for example, in weaving cloth, would be a perfect example. And your home would be your business. They were one and the same. But because of this, we have the loss of those industries. So what happens is that we start to have little mill towns that used to be on the banks of rivers, right? Those are still there, still on the banks of rivers, but now the rivers are going to be used not necessarily for power, but for transportation of goods and materials. So now those little mill towns grow into big cities. And it's also during this time, because of the Industrial Revolution, that the physical landscape changes because of the pressures of industry, right? So we have to remember that the steam engines are being powered by coal. And one of the countries that's loaded with coal happened to be Great Britain, right? So they had all of those coal mines going on. Cities were being, popping up and growing. They were cutting down orchards. And so for some of the first times in history, industries changing the physical landscape. And also during this time, we pick up urbanism. Okay, so you can look at, of course, the main part of that word, urban. This is when we have cities that are really starting to grow and shift into fourth and fifth gear as more and more people move from the country to the city, because there's no more home industries, right? Those windmills and, water mills on rivers are being replaced by these big industrial complexes in cities such as London. So we got more and more people moving into the city. Another thing that's happening during this time is consumerism. Since we have so many people working and earning a good wage in the factory, lots of people have some extra money in their pockets after they pay for all of their needs. So they're able to go out into shops and buy things that they don't need, right? They're able to have wants during this time. And this is what we call consumerism. In case you're wondering to yourself, we still have urbanism as well as consumerism with us today. And it's during this time, during Romanticism, during the Romantic period, that we see these ideas that are still with us in the 21st century really start to take root and flourish. Another thing that happens is growth of the middle class as well as the lower and working classes. So during this time, it's not just the upper class that's doing really well. We have everybody in the social pyramid working, everybody making money, earning a good wage in these factories. So next slide. Remember that the R in Romanticism stands for revolution. This is the time of political revolutions. Now, in America, of course, we're familiar with the American Revolution, right, in 1776. Now, not too many people know that without the help of one country, and that country training our militia, and that country's navy coming to help the colonies, we would not have defeated Great Britain. And that country is France, right? So what happened is that there were French officers who came over and were training the militia, training our soldiers, the Continental Army. So then what happened is that after the American Revolution, they went back to France. And they went home and in the different meeting houses. And people said, well, what did you do in America? And they said, well, we fought so they could govern themselves, so they would not be ruled by the king and queen of England. And the people in France said, boy, so you fought so a different country could achieve its own, rule themselves? Let's do that here. And that's what happened. So the ideas of the American Revolution took hold, and then we have the French Revolution that started. Now, the French Revolution compared to the American Revolution was much longer, it was very chaotic, and it was incredibly bloody. This, if you've ever heard stories about the guillotine, this is what happened during the French Revolution. And the guillotine eventually was to claim the life of the king and queen of England, as well as many, many royals. So it's important to remember in Romanticism that this is the time of revolution, industrial revolution, as well as political revolution. Now, in England, of course, England is being governed by this time by a monarchy, right? King and queen. And right across the English Channel, right, which really is a very narrow band of water, is, of course, France. And what's happening in France? Well, the king and queen have their heads chopped off. Lots of members of the royal family have their heads chopped off. So if you're a royal living in Great Britain, this is a time of great uncertainty as we enter into this age of revolution and romanticism.